research, so I'm going to reflect a little bit on where we stand, at least in therapeutics. This map is from clinicaltrials.gov, reflecting the numbers of registered clinical trials. On the left is 2016, and on the right, 2 days ago, when I prepared this talk. And these numbers really reflect that the number of clinical trials worldwide are increasing, and similarly in the Middle East. So here you could see it increased from 2 years, from 9,400 in the region to more than 11,000. If we zoom in a little bit here, you could see in Saudi Arabia the number of clinical trials increased by almost 20% in 2 years, which is really good. Under this, there are subcategories. So phase 1, I was very interested in looking at this because this is one of the major focuses of this session. So in the region of Middle East, there are registered 737 phase 1 trials. And in Saudi Arabia, I found that in clinicaltrials.gov, there are 22 clinical trials registered at phase 1. I was a little curious about this. So I looked at them, and I have to say that most of them are actually not phase 1. So they are just registered like this, but they are not correct. So I'm not sure. Doesn't look like there's some issue with registration. Phase 2, there are more trials registered. So from the whole region, 1,900. And from Saudi Arabia, 64 clinical trials in the clinicaltrials.gov. Phase 3 and 4, much larger number. So in Saudi Arabia, 202 clinical trials. Of course, this is one public database. There are many public databases. But just to keep it in mind, there are other registries of clinical trials. So not all the trials will be registered in clinicaltrials.gov. But just to put things in perspective. This is from CAC's report in 2016, showing the number of publications, which is really going up, as you see here. You could see over the last years is going exponentially. 2016 is probably the numbers are incomplete because it was that year report, but the numbers are going up. Similarly, the impact of this publication also is going up, very encouraging. And I expect this trajectory will continue. This is the Global Innovation Index. This is not restricted to biomedical research. It's all disciplines. But it reflects the Global Innovation Index on the y-axis and the GDP on the y-axis. And you could see among the top countries here, for example, United States, Britain, Switzerland, and all the other countries are different places. Saudi Arabia is here, which I thought is really actually reasonable. We are more ambitious to move up on the curve, and especially definitely in our field with biomedical area. Part of a clinical trial is collaboration. This is from Nature website about connectivity and collaboration around the world. And these circles, each one reflect a country. So the red are the North American countries. The blue are Europe. Green is South America. And this is Middle East. And the biggest collaborator in the world in terms of research is United States, for example, here. This is Europe. And this is Saudi Arabia. So there is collaboration. Considering the size of the country and the institutions, it is okay. We'd like to make it more collaborative, but definitely there is ongoing collaboration with many places. If you look at Saudi Arabia in particular, then this is what countries we collaborate with in different aspects of research. We collaborate with many, many nations around the world. The top being United States of America, China, Germany, United Kingdom, France, etc. These are the top countries in terms of collaboration, top 10 according to the Nature database. So listed here. I think we have definitely good basis to conduct clinical research. We have, at least from a medical standpoint, we have many medical colleges. We have increasing number of graduates, and we have large number of hospitals and hospital beds and clinics and huge patient population. We have increasing number of scientists, graduates per year. We have really high-quality medical facilities, laboratory facilities in our tertiary care centers and in the research centers. So this is all good basis to conduct clinical research. IT and connectivity is becoming top of the line in many places, so that also helps a lot. We have really, as I showed, good communication, good collaboration. I'm going to reflect on this, at least in my experience. We have subspecialties in many areas that also helps in forming networks for research. So these are all great. This is my assessment of different aspects that are needed for research. It doesn't mean that's right or wrong, but just my own impression. So patient pool, definitely we don't have a small patient pool, or we don't have massive like United States. We are reasonably good patient pool compared to the country size. Patient recruitment rate, I think at least my experience in recruitment in clinical trial is reasonably good. We have some issues with recruiting patients, but it's not bad. It's definitely better than what many people think. Speed, I think we're okay. We can be better in terms of the efficiency of conducting clinical trials. I think conducting clinical trials in Saudi Arabia is not very expensive. It's not very cheap, but it's I think is reasonably situated in the world. So it's actually attractive for many places. Facility and investigator pool, I think we have, and it's increasing, and I think that also will be great. Local experience with industry trial, I would say average. Regulatory environment, we have, I think we're getting better and better. There is room for improvement for sure. I think the quality of data, at least from what my experience is actually high. We have very good quality of data delivered in clinical trials. Improving the efficiency of clinical trial is really rely on a complex interaction of many factors. You cannot pinpoint one item and you improve it and things will get better next day. It doesn't work this way. It's a collection of many domains that need to be improved. So we are all partner in this. Regulators, and that we're going to hear a lot about this, sponsors, government agencies, healthcare systems, research sites and networks, ethics committees, CROs, and patients and community. All of us are involved, and things will need to be worked out to improve and get research and efficient and effective around the world. My impression, and again, this doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but these are some thoughts. There are areas that can be improved from investigator standpoint. I think we need to work on the research culture. We need to foster a research culture on a wide scale to help improving research. Funding opportunities for many investigators is an issue and need to be improved. Infrastructure is critical. I think we are definitely getting better, but we need to focus on, if you want to do high quality research, big stuff, we need research coordinators who are stable, who they have their career in the specialty. We cannot have PRN. We cannot have part-timers will be good, but will not help you in conducting very high quality research. We need to build the experience by having this pool. And this is what's done in many nations. You go to the Australian and Canadian, they have pool of assistant staff who are there in that specialty for years and years. So they know the language, they know regulations, etc. Statistical support, we need to, this is a major issue for many of my colleagues and for many of us, is we need to rethink about the way we provide statistical support. Database development, we need to make it more efficient and accessible. Quality monitoring, efficiency in regulatory processes. I'm going to show you a couple of slides. This is a worldwide issue, but I think we need to look at it, how to make things more efficient. Networks and collaboration, I think also a major area. I think research cannot work without collaboration. Research, cutting-edge research is a multidisciplinary by nature. It's multinational, multi-institution, etc. And without collaboration, it won't work. A couple of thoughts that came last few days. From ICU research, a lot of emphasis, for example, on long-term follow-up. And the system healthcare hospitals are not designed to do follow-up for research. And research clinic may be something to look into. Big issue is liability, and especially if we are going in the area of phase 1 trial, we need to think about liability issues. We need to talk about risk management. It's very important, especially phase 1. I think phase 3, phase 2, phase 3, you have patients already sick, they are being treated, but this you are getting healthy people, and even low risk may not be acceptable. This slide is right side down, but this is a survey from the American Board of Internal Medicine, looked at satisfaction of investigators in relation to the time to take IRB to approve. And again, this is investigator perspective. And clearly, if you look this way, you will see that the satisfaction of investigators declines substantially as the time becomes longer, And this is the number of weeks. You are talking about 35 weeks maximum, 5 weeks minimum. So the shorter, the better. This is an experience from India where they focus on reducing the time to approval. And it's actually really interesting to see, at least in one institution, the time to accept and get things sorted out for clinical trials decline. This will help making the place more attractive for clinical trials. We need to think about liability. Phase 1 trials in particular are not risk-free. Probably risk is low, but it's not free. And I think we need to be careful about this. There are some serious events that can happen with phase 1 trial. Some deaths even happen. But when they happen, they are rare, but when they happen, they really make the news. And they'll be everywhere because you are talking about healthy people walk in, like in these cases, where they treated and they got something really bad happen to them. Experience with networks is amazing. This is from the ANZEX, which is the Australian New Zealand Critical Care Trial Group. In a few years, this is in a few years, 1994 to I think this 2016, they have 43,000 patients recruited. It's a massive industry, okay, to do clinical trials. 80 million grants, 148 peer-reviewed publications, including many in the New England Journal of Medicine. So they make the news. It's really a machine. It's a true machine for research. In Saudi Arabia, I think we also are getting better, reflecting on critical care at least. I think exponentially the number of publications going up. This is based on PubMed. From 85 to 2017, you could see the numbers are rising. And KMARC and King Abdulaziz Medical City were really privileged to have 8 publications in New England Journal of Medicine in the last few years. So where I think we can do high quality research, that influence practice. It's very important. Several in JAMA and Lancet and others. The experience with Saudi Critical Care Trial Group, which I'm privileged to chair, has been amazing. We had many collaboration with the ANZEX Critical Care Trial Group in many trials listed here, Canadian Critical Care Trial Group. These are really leading studies in the field with Johns Hopkins, with Discovery Network, with the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine and Asian Critical Care Trial Group. So it's a great opportunity to network. This is our own study. This is sponsored by KMARC. This conducted mainly in our site and in collaboration with 7 other sites, with total of 7 sites, where we randomized around 900 patients to different feeding strategy. It has impacted practice in feeding nutrition. We just finished another trial, which is sponsored jointly by KMARC and CAXT. I'm really grateful to KMARC and CAXT for supporting this. This is the PREVENT trial, randomized control trial for use of pneumatic compression devices in DVT prophylaxis. This is a 2,000-patient clinical trial that was conducted in 19 countries, 19 centers in 4 countries, shown here. The results will be released in February, but we have these protocols published. The Saudi Critical Trial Group, which include many sites, is now working on several important projects led by different colleagues. So we have, and very relevant to the Saudi practice, traumatic brain injury, Acinetobacter, benchmarking, blood transfusion, pressure ulcer, etc., listed here. We hopefully will be finishing soon a pilot study on a big project for feeding called the Replenish trial, and hopefully we'll apply for funding for multi-center trial in the near future. Soon we'll be launching a big clinical trial of 40,000 patients, maybe more, 40,000 patient cluster randomized trial of using electronic alert system in all the National Guard hospitals, in the 5 National Guard hospitals, 45 wards. This will be cutting edge, really technology using cluster and using network data. This is the basic design. So I'll go through detail. MERS, I think, has been on the agenda for KMARC for years now, since MERS started. And again, we have several important work done in terms of therapeutics. And I'm thankful to also MOH and Saudi FDA for their help. We have this, we're ongoing trial, it's called Miracle trial, using lopinavir, ritonavir, and interferon beta 1b double-blind randomized control trial that is ongoing. We have recruited 36 patients so far, and we'll have our first interim analysis hopefully in early March, where we'll decide about the future of what's next. In the pipeline, it's under review now in KMARC for possible sponsorship, is a clinical trial using anti-MERS antibodies. It's called SAB-301, where it's a humanized antibodies against MERS-CoV. The proposal is under review now. This has passed already phase 1 trial, proving that it's safe and it's long-lasting half-life. It's called AIMS trial. It will be done in Saudi Arabia, and in North America, if there are cases, they will be done with NIH. There are several monoclonal antibodies that potential use for therapeutics, but they are in different stages of development for MERS. The only one that is really ready for clinical use for phase 2 is the polyclonal that I mentioned. Very exciting development about a small molecule called remdesivir, or GS5734. This is a novel agent, essentially broad-spectrum antiviral that has been shown to be effective against different viruses, but in particular Ebola and MERS. It has passed phase 1 trial, and it is in fact undergoing a phase 2 trial in Ebola patients in Africa called PREVAIL trial. We are in discussion with them about conducting clinical trial on this. So in summary, what I try to say that I think there is good experience in phase 2, phase 3 trials. And there's definitely there's promising future for clinical trials in Saudi Arabia and KMARC in particular. I think the focus on clinical trials should be on the highest impact for society. I think we can, the sky is the limit, and I think what we need is to address some of the challenges, improve networks, and aim high. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Arabi, for setting up the stage and the basis for our discussion this session. So clinical trials is not an easy task. It's very complicated, is a multitask activity, I guess, and it involves many stakeholders from the start until the end, even during. So it has so many obligations on the investigators, on the institution, on the regulatory authorities. So let me start with this question, ask the panelists on their opinion, their perspective. So if it's really so sophisticated process to conduct clinical trials, why would the institutions the health institutions or medical doctors would like to conduct clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, or even 4. But let us focus on the one with intervention, which is phase 1, 2, and 3. So the question here I have is what is the impact of doing clinical trials on the health economy as well as the quality of health?
Assalamu alaikum. I'll just, instead of taking the whole time, but the major component is that can influence the healthcare delivery in general and also as a practitioner. For a practitioner, from a practitioner point of view, participating in clinical trials is part of their role as a researcher. To engage in research, to be part of an innovation, to be part of something could potentially change the healthcare system or potentially change how we treat a specific disease or diagnose a specific disease. So it's the animal inside us that are looking for something new. Plus, providing their patient access to innovative medicine and access to innovative technology, especially in rare disease, orphan disease, or a complicated disease where there is an alternative remedy. It doesn't exist or rarely exists. So providing access is an ethical point, in an ethical aspect of being a practitioner that will allow patient to use or to engage in that specific trial. For an entity or a healthcare in general, or healthcare facility in general, improvement in quality of data, quality of operation, being able to provide patients with access, increase the how business is done internally, because the way that pharma company and medical devices company, let's say, pushing healthcare facility to implement higher standard for quality to ensure data integrity and data quality will reflect positively in how they do business internally. I'm not going to elaborate more, so I'll leave the stage for others.
Thank you. I will add the following. Saudi Arabia is consuming roughly 0.5% of global pharmaceuticals, but it's only participating on a market share basis in 0.02% of global clinical trial market share. That leaves a huge gap between those patients who consume medication in development of which they have not participated. So if the question is, why should Saudi investigators be interested in participating in clinical trials? That is primarily to close the gap between the medication which is being used in medical practice relative to that which is currently being developed, but the Saudi patients are not being exposed to it early on, and it presents a potential ethical dilemma down the road, as we have outlined in our book chapter on research ethics in the Middle East. For those interested, we'll share after the meeting.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I used to be a physician and barely practice at the moment, and my focus has been on improving the investment ecosystem within Saudi, within the healthcare, in the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority. So I'll take this opportunity to answer it from an economical point of view. Saudi spends about $8 billion a year on pharmaceuticals, and was very well mentioned and analyzed. We're just buying boxes. Those drugs have not been developed on the Saudi patients, and despite our belief that they should and would work for our population, we do have a different genetic composition. We do come from a mixed pot. That means these drugs may be improved to suit us better. And with all this money that we're spending on the purchasing of these pharmaceuticals coming from abroad, how much funding are we receiving from the R&D community? There are billions that being invested globally, and we're trying to find ways to bring that R&D funds to the country. As Professor Arabi mentioned clearly, with a very impressive work, Saudi does have the infrastructure, does have the manpower, does have the patient pool, and that might be an opportunity since we have more metabolic diseases, especially diabetes. There's a global shortage of pool for research. So the question comes, how can we all work together to bring these R&D funds into Saudi Arabia? I don't think there's any excuse anymore for the multinational pharmaceuticals not to come into the country.
Thank you. I think all these points are excellent points, so I just add minor things. I would say as individuals or investigators, we want to do research because we want to do the best for our patients. We want to do it because we want to advance the science. I think that's internal motivation of individuals. Because we want to be part of scientific community. Having said that, I think individual motivation is good, but is not sufficient by itself. And it could work alone if you have somebody really, really very persistent. But you need to change this to make it as a system where we facilitate the interest and the qualification. We have people who are highly qualified, interested. We have to build a system for them to make a system that produces what's our vision. We should have the vision that is clear and the system that goes around it to make this a production line using people interest. So I think we need to combine the individual motivation, which is very important, with the system approach. Otherwise, the productivity will not be sufficient.
Thank you very much. Let me go to the next question. So we know now the importance of conducting clinical trials, the impact on the health economy, on the quality of health, giving access to the innovative medicine early on for advanced stage diseases like cancer. So we know the importance and the necessity to do clinical trials. So because of the complexity of the clinical trials, it involves many stakeholders, many parties. What would be the best mechanism or the best system, integrated system, to link between different entities in order to conduct clinical trials?
If you talk about healthcare facility as connecting, I think the experience from the South Korean healthcare system that established a national command center. That national command center will be able to be a linkage between different healthcare facility and also being a capacity building enabler. I guess taking a separate hospital or a specific hospital by itself, the number of bed capacity, the number of patient traffic will not be enough to say, to encourage international pharma company to look into Saudi market as a potential for a large pool of patients. So having a centralized entity that do the connection between or networking or making sure that exchange of data files or patient information files or availability of patient or at least marketing for specific clinical trials at a specific hospital will create an extra and very important role that is lacking currently. So unfortunately at the current time, pharma company to apply to each specific hospitals and find a specific researcher at a specific hospital to start recruiting from that site without knowing exactly the patient pool and how many potential patients are eligible to be recruited in any specific trial. So establishing that center will act as a lever to increase patient pool and also more investment into a local healthcare facility.
Yeah, I would like to say that I was extremely pleased, and I applaud the efforts of creating such a national command center for clinical trials. There are several of you in the audience who have seen me when I was still heading up Quintiles operations in the Middle East, and I was advocating strongly creating national network of sites. And to see this happen now, and taking example of Connect, the Korean National Clinical Trials Center, is really an excellent example. Just for those of you who are not familiar with what Connect does, and I would say that's probably a prelude what will be happening in Saudi Arabia, hopefully. They are using electronic hospital records of the government hospitals, which is by and large almost 100% of the entire patient pool, and they are making them de-identified, available to sponsors of clinical trials for planning them. I think this is an excellent first step. I would say expanding on what Connect does is probably another great example is UK model of National Institute of Health Sciences, who are also using the national network of government hospitals, of national NHS, but they are also supporting sponsors of clinical trials after the trial goes live, and they are providing performance metrics. They intervene if a site is not performing. These are some excellent examples from around the world, and it's really good to see that Saudi Arabia is taking the courageous steps in implementing them.
I don't think I can add much, but it's clear that we have pockets of excellence all over the country. We are currently privileged to be in one of the best research institutions within the country with proven track record. The question is, how do we connect these multiple pockets of excellence together? And the command center is a great idea that I think is going to make a huge impact. We also like to mention that one of the target of the country with the vision transformation is to have the unified health record, and steps have been taken to implement that. So hopefully soon our target to have 70% of our population all connected on a unified health platform. Many people are working on it, and hopefully soon it will be available. That will help researchers gather the data, despite it being a very good level data. I think having exposure, ability to access it would have a great impact. Also, I think there's many clinical trial units that have been recently established in universities, whether it's in Riyadh or Jeddah, and bringing that together would have a huge impact.
Another aspect related to the connectivity and networking, which was mentioned, is connection with the other disciplines that are needed to conduct clinical trial. Our experience in KMARC with the medical trial, for example, that we had multiple meetings with Saudi FDA and the Ministry of Health to address many of the issues, some challenges. It's not an easy trial, it's a difficult trial to do because the patients are everywhere. And that solved a lot of the problems. So I think having exchanges with other agencies that are involved in research, not only from our discipline, but also the regulatory, governmental is critical. I think these exchanges should be happening regularly for different kind of clinical trials.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that's better. Well, great. This is in fact a big challenge for us, is to have the. I mean, everybody is connected and be in the loop of communication. It's not within the same institution. It's with different entities. So we're talking about regulatory authorities. We're talking about sponsors, CROs, maybe other healthcare institutions, and then within the health institution there are also other parties, which is the quality management, the team, the data management team, and quality monitors, and so on and so forth. So it is within and outside the institutions. We need this integrated system. let me go to maybe a next challenging questions for the panelists, which is, with this in mind, for the complexity of the system and building, which is a good news from Dr. Tahir, that 75% of the institutions will be connected through the healthcare system, and it's going to be a very attractive for the sponsor and the CRO. I think if we fix the problem, then we come to the next issue, which is training and education for the research team. You know, research team is not only the investigator. Research team involves the investigator, the sub-investigator or co-investigators, the research coordinator, the research nurses, and so on and so forth. So there are many team members involved in the clinical trials. So in order to make sure that generating high quality data is maintained during the clinical trials, how can we improve the education and the training for the research team? You can use the mic.
Okay, I get the head start here. Well, it is an absolutely crucial point. When we look at the capacity of Saudi Arabia in terms of volume of clinical trials, it can realistically attract, which would be roughly that's 0.5%. It consumes medication, it should be equal to that in terms of participation in clinical research. With that, you would need approximately 1,500 clinical research professionals in the country. Currently, I think at one point I thought I knew them all. It was about 100, I would say. So the gap is very, very substantial. I would see a potential for at least 1 or 2 master in clinical research programs that will be brought from the UK or US universities. Master in clinical research is certainly a great start. It could be diploma trainings as well. All in all, building up, and over the next 10 years, I would say that should happen, the sizable training of hundreds and thousands of clinical research professionals by opening master and other diploma courses at Saudi universities, teaming up with European and or US universities with long history of running these.
Well, from a regulation point of view, well, it's 2 things. First of all, we all train to be researchers at one level, and it starts by the physicians themselves, and as Professor Yassin mentioned, it's the individual responsibility as part of our job as clinicians is to never forget that research is part of clinical delivery. But once again, that's not a systematic way, it's not a structured way, and for sure we do need the organizations that will train and develop these individuals. The Saudi Council for Health Specialty have taken many good strides in trying to put the criteria, the programs, the curriculums to achieve those individuals. I'm not working closely with them. Maybe Dr. Jaffali is more aware of those programs with your knowledge with the Saudi Council.
Well, remember that Saudi Council is actually a regulator. It's not sometimes designing or delivering that such of a training. But I guess the role of academic institution and the role of a hospital should drive that type of training and collaborate with the Saudi Health Council in order for them to accredit or monitor and being able to regulate that type of training. In addition to that, the most important thing is for physician and health practitioner to realize being a healthcare practitioner doesn't translate into a clinical trialist. So you have to have a proper training and proper education in order for you to participate and engage in such type of research. But I guess healthcare, Saudi Health Council role is not only targeted toward physician. The most important piece of the puzzle is the nurses and the supporting staff that help clinical trialists to actually be able to deliver what is designed in the protocol. But I guess the Saudi Health Council will be more than happy to support and also to engage in regulating such a training.
I would add, I think these are all great points. I would add two things. One, as again from academic institution and from KMARC maybe standpoint, to do high quality research and high volumes, we need to create a critical mass. I mean, one person is not going to be able to do it. So you need to create a critical mass in that area that has enough depth. Now to do this, I think we need to work on mentoring system. We have to have an established mentoring system where junior researchers are mentored for some time by more senior people in a systematic fashion. Number two, I think we have a lot of graduates who have masters in different aspects of research. What we need is to create a proper culture for them, because sometimes if they're not put in the right culture, their interest fades with the time. And I think what we need is to put them in a very encouraging culture so they can be highly productive. The last thing is related to what Dr. Ibrahim mentioned about the research system. It's not about the researcher only. It's assistants and coordinators, your staff. To understand research well, these people has to be stable over time. They have to be focused. They have to have enough depth. And this, you do it only if you create microsystems, if you create people specialized in certain areas. So I've been on management committee of many research, and you could see the coordinator talks like a PI. She knows for years. She's been doing this for 20 years. She knows all the details, knows the language, knows the outcome, knows the limitation, knows the regulation. And without having this depth, it will be difficult to move forward.
Just last point. I think training and education about clinical research is not only academic credentials, but also having a specific residency and fellowship that are targeted to a specific type of research. Unfortunately, as far as I know, that we don't have anything that are similar to research fellowship as what happens in Canada, in the US, or another country. So establishing a structured type of training, not necessarily an academic path, but also that reflect the real world type of research that most of any academic, Canadian or US trained physician, I think they see some type of these type of fellowship that are offered or available in certain hospitals.
I guess the biggest challenge that we have is with regards to the training of the investigators. We are dealing with clinicians, and physicians has to be the PI for conducting clinical trials. And educating or training physicians, very busy physicians in their clinical side is really a big challenge, unless you take them out of their work for a certain period of time and then you start training them. We are talking about advanced training, high quality training, because we are dealing with patient's life, or subject's life, research subject life, which is a critical issue with regards to when it comes to research. If it's for practice, then it's part of the practice. But if it comes to research, which is something elective, and exposing the patient to intervention because of research is really critical. So it needs really an intensive and advanced training for those physicians to take care of their research subjects. So I know it is going to be a very hard task, but it needs probably collaboration from different entities and different aspects. Let us focus mainly on phase 1 clinical trial. Phase 2, 3, and maybe 4 is probably easy, and it's like a continuation, and you have a pool of subjects, patients in different institutions, different sites. But when it comes to phase 1, which is the first trial in humans, it has really become a big challenge, more challenge. So we are moving in this direction of phase 1 clinical trial. I would like to hear your insight on this with regards to the infrastructure, the readiness for institutions in Saudi Arabia in conducting phase 1 clinical trial?
I will talk from clinical standpoint here about the phase 1. I think we may be ready for this, but there are a few things need to be really addressed. One is regulatory issues. Second, I think liability has to be addressed very, 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 very carefully. And I think we need to be, the research of culture in the community need to be clear, because, as I said, most of these will be safe, will be okay. But you may have very rare occasion where things go wrong. And I think we need to have a proper risk management for this. What if this happened? Well, how can we handle it? Because this could really affect the program completely. It can destroy the whole program. So we need to have a proper plan for this, and maybe start slow, maybe start small, and gradually go build experience. But as a clinician, I think it's very important to have proper risk management and proper liability. Otherwise, it's risk.
I think looking at the healthcare ecosystem that we have huge variation at the level of clinical institutions. So starting with institution with a more developed and mature system would be where to start. Of course, the regulation has to be addressed as well, and I'm sure we can have discussions on how we can all work together to clarify that from a legal perspective, from a contractual perspective, and so on. But definitely, we do have the major institutions that can do it. We have the National Guards of the world, the medical cities of the Ministry of Health, and so on. I think they all are capable to implement phase 1 trials.
So let me share my views on this topic. I know phase 1 has been from the very early days when we came and we were discussing planning clinical trials. The question of can you bring phase 1 was often asked, and I didn't change substantially my view I had then to now. My answer then would be. You can, or the population can benefit substantially more if you create appropriate environment to substantially increase the volume of phase 2 and particularly phase 3 clinical trials. And as I told you, there is a very sizable gap about where it needs to be. So I would say, and that is now being addressed through the command center, which is excellent. I would say from the standpoint of benefits to the population, that takes precedence to phase 1. Phase 1 may be associated with a more glamour, if you wish, perhaps. There is also substantial money involved. However, in the grand scheme of things, I think it should take a second or third row rather, after you have been successful at substantially increasing volume for the phase 2 and phase 3. I know there are institutions in Saudi Arabia perfectly capable today of conducting world-class phase 1. Actually, 5 years ago, we have been, I believe, either the first or the second company who have successfully conducted phase 1 study, of course, fully approved by Saudi FDA, in pediatric population then. So we know it's possible. I know it can be done at the highest standard. I would just perhaps question the wisdom of trying to accelerate it.
So the only point that I need to add is it's not about the infrastructure or the capability of the importance or not, of starting with phase 1 or other phases. But the issue currently is the entire value chain of regulatory structure. Currently, and I'm not talking about the role of Saudi FDA or the role of ethical committee inside the hospital, or from the time that a company submits a proposal until the first time they recruit their first volunteer or patient, is still a very lengthy process. To make it attractive for them, you have to significantly shorten that time. from the submission until the first eligible participant will be able to recruit it. Currently, it takes months, I guess. Maybe Vladimir can elaborate on that from your previous experience. Months and months. So you cannot isolate it inside the hospital or inside the agency that will be able to shorten the time period from this amount of time to this amount of weeks. Actually, the company, their target is the first recruitment or the first patient to be enrolled in that specific trial. So if we take that value chain and you start analyzing weak points that are related to approval, ethical approval, contractual agreement, hiring, training, and the entire issue and the entire steps that are required until we, achieve our goal to recruit the first patient, then this is need to be evaluated properly. We can shorten that period of time and then show international pharma company that we're able to conduct successfully, or at least been able to shorten that time period significantly. Then they will start considering moving some of the or part of the phase 1 clinical trials into a market like Saudi.
I guess all of you agree that we start with phase 2, 3, and then have master the skills and maybe the information, the knowledge and experience of phase 2 and 3, increase the volume of phase 2 and 3, and then probably move to the next step, phase 1. Having said that, does not mean that we do not start with phase 1 if there is a chance. So, as Dr. Tahir mentioned, that we start with the more advanced institution that have probably reasonable and good infrastructure to have the phase 1 clinical trial. I think it sounds reasonable, fair and good, but not to forget about phase 1 right now. As we go up, we might consider phase 2 and 3 and maybe develop a strategy, and then by the time we master this knowledge and skills and experience, we can scale more on phase 1 clinical trial. The last topic that I have, although we supposed to have somebody from the regulatory authority to speak about the regulations, but let me have your input on from your experience or from whatever you have with regards to the regulatory authority or regulatory requirements for clinical trials in Saudi.
So again, how we define regulatory authority. The regulatory authority, any function within the steps that are required that are essential for approval of a protocol. So the ethical committee is part of the requirements. SFDA approval is part of regulatory requirements. And other things that are regulation in nature that are part of the regulatory requirements. But Saudi FDA, I cannot speak on their behalf, but I can speak from my previous experience. They start applying several techniques to help institution, help company to approve their files or their protocol fast. So they allow parallel submission. So you can submit to the ethical committee and submit to the Saudi FDA at the same time. They try to work with CROs in order for them to be able to submit successfully their protocol. They conduct some of the training, conduct some of the capacity building training for CRO personnel and also for hospital personnel in things related to regulatory requirements. But they cannot dance alone, to be honest. Having to dance a tango, you need at least two. So for authority to actually leverage the potential of shortening that period of time, they need to arrange with also the ethical committee inside the hospital and also the administration to shorten the period of all the requirements. But I guess it's still the role of the ethical committee and national bioethics committee need more and more effort in order to at least monitor, help and support local ethical committee to be able to be more effective, more vigilant in regard to time, more they're active in monitoring clinical trials that are conducted locally. So it's an ecosystem. They should all work together, and it could be orchestrated by someone like SAGIA that see the entire ecosystem of regulation and try to help and support each entity as again, the goal is not the approval time or the improving a specific pain point, but actually shortening the period of time, without jeopardizing the quality of review, without jeopardizing patient safety, but at least shortening the period of time until first patient or first participant recruitment.
I agree 100%. Dr. Geraisim mentioned that pharma companies and sponsors of clinical trials determine suitability of the country based on the total duration of the startup period. From the moment the first sites are being identified to the recruitment of the first patient. Typically, these timelines are around 6 months, give or take, around the world. Of that 6 months, the regulatory approval process is a very small step, you can say, and you can say that not having a good regulatory framework is certainly a showstopper, but constantly looking at regulatory authority as the entity which should shorten the startup timelines is not fair also, because they are, and in Saudi Arabia I can say Saudi FDA does a very good job in running a robust process and adhering to predictable timelines. And it is when we should be discussing shortening clinical trial timelines, and the role of regulatory, I think in Saudi Arabia is fulfilled. So we should be looking elsewhere. Ethics committees is one. Oftentimes the delays are in execution of clinical trial agreements. Sometimes it takes weeks. It's sitting on somebody's desk, is not moving.
Sorry for interruption, but what is the acceptable time for the approval from the sponsor or CRO perspective? So shall we say, I know in Turkey, for instance, they have only 1 month maximum, but they can have approval within a week. In Korea, for instance, 1 month. So what is the acceptable time? This is, and in some advanced countries, developed countries, like in the States, sometimes they take up to 1 year for approval. So what is the acceptable timeline for approving clinical trials, in your opinion?
I would turn the question slightly, and I would say, let's not speak only about clinical trial approval, the regulatory step. Let's think about what is acceptable period to get clinical trials started from the moment we start looking at the first sites until the site is ready or patient is prepared to be recruited. That window is roughly 4 to 6 months. If you can do that, then you can play big league. If this is over 10 months and certainly over 12 months, then you're probably out of the game. But again, not the regulatory approval, the whole step. Yes, but let me tell you this, and you can ask, okay, so if the regulatory approval only takes 2 months, what is the rest? It usually starts with a very slow start. Feasibility questionnaires are sent out before anyone executes a confidentiality agreement at site, before anyone looks at the protocol, before anyone completes the site information form and that is returned, that often takes a month or more. So you usually are very late off the gate already. The regulators then cannot squeeze the time anymore. It's already very late start, and there I think the secret heroes and the secret weapon of successful clinical trial is availability of clinical trial infrastructure. It doesn't have to be fancy. Clinical trial coordinator is a great start. That person makes sure CDA is executed, make sure the doctor looked at the protocol, make sure the site information form has been completed, communicates with a CRO, with pharma. That should be the focus, not regulatory in Saudi Arabia.
I hope our coordinators here and hearing this comment.
So, following Dr. Jafari's suggestion, the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority has recently started an active committee. We meet once a month. First meeting was about three weeks ago. This committee is chaired by His Excellency the Governor of Sagia, just to give it the momentum it needs. The members include representative from the pharma group, the CEO of all major multinational companies who showed interest to be in that committee, regulators within the country, whether it's the Saudi Arabian Ethics Committee, industrial clusters, Saudi FDA, Ministry of Health. We have ad hoc members from CACST, everybody who is related to the R&D or the clinical trial as a potential part of their R&D, because as you know, R&D is a huge scope. It's not just the clinical trials. And the question that was laid on this table for the committee is, what do we need as a country to establish or to fix in order to bring all the R&D funds that multinationals are spending abroad? And we did it in a practical, commercial way that says, give me exactly the 4 or 5 major changes that you would need to be implemented in order that you would commit to bring your R&D funds. And as you know, the R&D funds would typically start with phase 2 and 3 clinical trials as a priority, but we're pushing further to see whether they can do even molecular bench work and even diagnostics as well, post-marketing testing as well. So it's a huge portfolio, but we're asking them in a practical, commercial way, what do we need to make this happen? Of note, we are very close to register a multinational CRO within the country because they come through the SAGA. So hopefully we can announce it and they will be a major player in the clinical trial system.
On multi-center study perspective, I think we need to re-evaluate the process for approvals at the multi-center levels. So sometimes you may have a project that already been through extensive peer review and already sponsored, and then it applies in multiple sites. It goes through extensive review from start, sometimes questioning even the rationale of the project, which makes no sense, and asking to add or make changes on a multi-center study, which is almost impossible task. Also the CTAs, I think the CTAs was mentioned, because when we look at it, multiple sites, also this is also an issue. People go through the language. Each site look at the language differently and request revisions, and it becomes extremely time consuming. I think we need to have better understanding across all sites for more efficient process for multi-center studies, and should be treated in a not different from studies that are proposed from start. I mean, it's not a start. This is a study already been approved, it has approval in other places, should be treated in a different pathway.
Absolutely. I'm really honored and delighted to be to chair this session. I learned a lot, benefited a lot from our distinguished panelists. So please join me to thank all panelists for their contribution, for sharing their experience and giving their insightful thoughts and wisdom. Thank you very much.
مع ختام هذه الجلسة نشكر مدراء الجلسة والأعضاء الكرام على ما تم طرحه، والآن سوف ننتقل إلى الفقرة التالية وهي فترة الغداء. نرجو من الحضور الكرام أخذ جميع المستلزمات الشخصية، وذلك استعدادا لبعض الإجراءات الأمنية استقبالا لصاحب السمو والأمير ووزير الحرس الوطني خالد بن عبد العزيز بن عياف. Please note that it is lunch time, and please take all your belongings, and that's for the preparation for the arrival of the Minister of National Guard. Thank you so much.
وكان في initiative